Most people think a stroke ends when the patient leaves the hospital. But the terrifying truth is this: the most dangerous phase of a stroke begins after you survive it. Your brain is not stable. It is not recovering. It is in a state of electrical and biological chaos that can either rebuild your life or quietly destroy everything you are. And the clock is already ticking. But here's what almost no doctor ever explains. Now, let me show you what truly happens inside the recovering brain, and why almost everything people believe about stroke recovery is scientifically wrong. There is a dangerous myth floating around hospital hallways and insurance paperwork that I need to dispel right now. It is the idea that there is a deadline on your brain. You might have heard that if you do not get your movement or speech back within 3 to 6 months after a stroke, you never will. That statement is scientifically false. While the timeline for recovery is brutally uncertain, modern neuroscience has proven that the window for healing never truly closes. But knowing how to keep that window open requires understanding the complex biology hidden inside your skull. Today, we are going to walk through the timeline of a stroke, not just by looking at a calendar, but by looking inside the brain of a patient named Robert. Let me introduce you to Robert. He is 58 years old, a piano teacher, and a grandfather. One Tuesday morning, Robert dropped his coffee cup. He tried to apologize to his wife, but the words would not come out. By the time the ambulance arrived, a blood clot had starved a specific part of his brain of oxygen. To understand how long recovery takes, you first have to understand what needs to be recovered. When a stroke happens, there is a core area of the brain where cells die almost immediately. Those cells are gone. But surrounding that dead core is a critical area called the penumbra. Think of the penumbra like a stunned, silent neighborhood surrounding a bomb site. These cells are in shock. They are not dead, but they are offline. In the first few days and weeks, much of what looks like severe disability is actually just this penumbra waiting to be woken up. But there is another hidden force at play in these early days, something far more mysterious than swelling or penumbra. It is called diaskesis. Imagine Robert's brain as a vast electrical grid. When the stroke struck, it did not just knock out the neighborhood where the clot landed. It caused a blackout across distant regions that depended on signals from the damaged area. These regions are not injured. They are not dead. They are simply offline, waiting. This shutdown is reversible. Diaskesis is functional, not structural damage. Over the next days and weeks, as the brain stabilizes, these remote circuits begin to flicker back to life. A patient who was completely limp on day 1 suddenly moves a finger on day 10. Not because something healed, but because the network came back online. This is why the early phase looks like magic. It is not magic. It is the brain coming out of shock. Here's the part most families never hear. For Robert, the first 2 weeks were not about recovery. They were about survival. The brain was swollen and angry. But as the swelling went down, he suddenly moved his thumb. This is where the most explosive phase of recovery begins, a phase often called the brain's golden window. But why is this period so special, and why does it eventually slow down? In the first 3 months, the brain enters a heightened state of plasticity. This is its natural repair mode. It starts dumping a cocktail of growth-promoting proteins and chemicals into the system to encourage new connections. Imagine a highway that has collapsed. During these early months, the brain is aggressively building dirt roads and bypasses around the damage. This is called spontaneous recovery. Robert saw massive gains here. He went from being bedbound to walking with a cane. He began speaking in short sentences. Family members often get incredibly excited during this phase because improvements happen fast, sometimes every single day. But around the 3 to 6 month mark, something changes. That cocktail of growth proteins starts to dry up. The brain exits repair mode and enters stabilization. The rapid daily miracles slow down. Robert woke up one day in month 4, and his hand felt exactly the same as the day before. And the day after that, still the same. He hit the dreaded plateau, and then, without warning, the miracles stop. Not because the brain is done, but because the rules of recovery have changed. But here's the twist that surprises most stroke survivors. The plateau is not the end. It is the moment the real work begins. Up until now, recovery was happening to Robert. From this point forward, the recovery must happen because of Robert. The brain moves from automatic healing into something far more demanding: activity-dependent plasticity. This is the deep neuroscience most people never hear. To continue improving, we must force the brain to rewire through massive repetition. Inside Robert's brain, and inside every stroke survivor's brain, lies a hidden reserve of connections called silent synapses. These are real physical connections between neurons built long ago but kept dormant like unused emergency circuits. They do not fire, they do not participate, and they do not help until the brain is pushed hard enough. When Robert repeats a movement hundreds of times, day after day, he is not just practicing. He is flipping a biological switch. Silent synapses begin to wake up. Let me simplify this. A pathway that was once dark becomes active. A circuit that never carried signals before suddenly lights up. This is the real reason breakthroughs can appear out of nowhere, even months or years after the stroke. The brain is not done. It is waiting for a reason to reawaken its hidden wiring. Think of it like walking through a dense forest. The first time you walk a new path, the grass is high, and it is difficult. That is your first attempt to lift your arm after the plateau. But if you walk that same path 500 times, the grass gets trampled down. A trail forms. This is cortical reorganization. The brain recruiting neighboring territory to take over for the damaged area. And here is the catch that determines if recovery takes 6 months or 6 years. The dose. Research suggests that to rewire a neural circuit for a simple movement, it might require hundreds of repetitions a day. Not 10, not 20, hundreds. Robert felt stuck because he was doing his exercises for 30 minutes a day. Once we explained that he needed to increase the intensity, the dead plateau started to show cracks of light. But there is a psychological trap that makes this phase drag on for years if you are not careful. It is called learned non-use, and it can quietly erase years of potential recovery. Back in month 4, it was difficult for Robert to use his weak right hand to eat. So he started using his strong left hand. It was faster. It was less embarrassing. His brain, built for efficiency, realized the left hand was easier and stopped trying to signal the right one. The pathway to his weak hand faded away, not because of the stroke, but because of neglect. Recovery in the long game, which can last for years, is often about unlearning this neglect. We used a method called constraint-induced movement therapy, where we literally put a mitt on Robert's good hand, forcing his brain to figure out the weak one. This method is powerful, but it requires trained therapists and is not available everywhere. So, how long does recovery take? A major study showed that patients were still improving 5 years after their stroke. 5 years. And here is the most astonishing part. When an old neural highway is destroyed, the brain does not always rebuild it. Sometimes it creates an entirely new one in a different neighborhood. This is called vicariation, the brain's version of reassignment. Cells that were never meant to control the hand begin learning how. Regions once used for vision or balance may take on small pieces of language or movement. It is slow, it is messy, it is imperfect, but it is real. This is why some survivors suddenly improve in year 2 or year 3. Not because the original tissue recovered, but because another region finally learned the job. The human brain is the only machine in existence that can lose a critical component, and then teach a completely different component to do that job instead. And the type of stroke matters. Robert had an ischemic stroke, a blockage. Patients like him often improve fast, early, then plateau. Hemorrhagic strokes, caused by a bleed, can look worse in the beginning. Patients may remain unconscious or severely impaired for weeks. But once the blood is reabsorbed, their long-term curve can sometimes surpass ischemic patients because the underlying tissue may be less damaged than we originally thought. We must also redefine what recovery means. If recovery means becoming exactly the person you were the day before the stroke, you may be setting yourself up for heartbreak. But if recovery means regaining independence and quality of life, the timeline is unlimited. Robert is now 4 years post-stroke. Does he play the piano like before? No. His right hand is slower. He cannot play the rapid concertos he once did. But he learned to play beautiful, slower pieces. He adapted. He is teaching again. His neurological recovery, the rewiring, got him 80% of the way there. His functional recovery, his ability to adapt, took him the rest of the way. Recovery is not a destination you arrive at. It is a trajectory you maintain, shaped by age, severity, genetics, and most importantly, your refusal to stop trying. So how long does stroke recovery take? The biological explosion happens in the first 3 months. The structural rewiring happens over the first 18 months. But the functional refinement, the part that truly changes your life, lasts as long as you are willing to keep going. If you or someone you love is sitting in that plateau, feeling like the window has closed, hear this. The brain is always listening. It never stops changing based on what you tell it to do. It just needs you to speak louder and more often. If this explanation helped you, please like the video so it can reach more families searching for hope. But more importantly, you need to know how to recognize a stroke before it causes permanent damage. I want you to learn the signs using the acronym FAST. I have a video right here that shows you exactly what to look for and what to do in those first critical minutes. Click here to watch that next, and I will see you there.